Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast, brought to you by racefortheprize.com. Go on over there, get you some fantasy NASCAR spreadsheets for Mexico. We're going to talk about the Xfinity series today, try to highlight some value picks, maybe predict who our lap leaders are going to be. We can use the spreadsheet to do that. Racefortheprize.com, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. Get all that lap by lap data, several practice sessions on Friday. All right. Let's get straight to it. Four things that I'm going to look at in this podcast: place differential, positions finished above expectation, positions gained above expectation, and your continuous palms or percentage of max speed. We'll use those stats in the spreadsheet. Tons of data, tons of tabs in this fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet for the Xfinity series and the Cup series. Get your hands on it. We'll start with the simplest, which is place differential. As you know, there are three ways to score in fantasy NASCAR. Finishing position, that's one bucket. Bucket number two for accumulating points is place differential. And then your third is going to be your hog points or dominator points, which is the fast laps and laps led. We'll talk mainly here about the value picks, which we all can agree on. They really only have access to two buckets. Like, for example, Kyle Sieg, Austin Green, Brad Perez. They're not going to lead laps or run fast laps. And that's the same for all the value picks. So when we are making our value selections, we're trying to fill up two buckets: finishing position and place differential. So when you're looking at the practice data and you're looking at all the advanced stats, you first ask yourself, can this guy maximize finishing position, accumulate the most points they possibly can, fill up that bucket as much as they can? But then also, just because you can earn a great finish, how is that place differential bucket looking? Meaning, are you starting further back so you can maximize points there? So when we're picking our value, we really want to be able to fill up both of those. There might be a driver that you really like that can get a top 15, but they're starting top 20. So you might have to lower your expectation, lower your rank, devalue that driver. Whereas the guy that you may not really love that much, but is starting in the back and can really fill that second place differential bucket up, there might be a better pick in terms of DFS. So that's where we want to start is, well, who has, over the last couple of years, done a really good job at filling up that second bucket, that place differential bucket? Because if you've seen in the optimal lineups or the winning lineups in an Xfinity Series road course, and even a Cup Series road course for that matter, the winning lineup often features not just value, but even mid-tier and even top-tier drivers that really maximize that second bucket of place differential. So this sheet that you're looking at here simply says, all right, let's look at all of the races. Let's look at all the races and how many place differential points did they get? And you can see it, 22, 23, 24. I mean, I'm even going all the way back to 2014 Watkins Glen. Everything, the last decade, what is the place differential perspective? So we'll just start here with what have they done over the last three seasons: 2022, 23, 24, and even including the race from this year. And we'll see on average who is accumulating the most place differential points. Small sample size for William Sawalich, because we only have one race, but he did run really well. And the advanced stats at COTA this year were very strong. I know he hasn't had the greatest season this year. It's been disappointing. It can happen to a rookie, especially one who has kind of been rushed up pretty quickly. But at COTA, as I mentioned, advanced stats look pretty good. Gained 14 place differential points. Dean Thompson also had a very solid race in his Toyota, but we do worry about the sample size. Then we get down to Ryan Sieg, a guy with a ton of road course experience, and he's been pretty good and pretty solid in terms of place differential. Not the greatest qualifier in road course races, but knows how to get past, the backpack, knows how to battle that back half of the teens. Not really a top 10 driver, so he's not going to completely maximize finishing position. But at 6,600, you really don't need that much in terms of finishing position. He also has been solid place differential-wise, definitely on the board. There you go. Pretty solid numbers. Brendan Poole, also good. You look at last year, other than the Roval, really solid place differential points. Now he's going to have a lower, his bucket in terms of finishing position is going to be a lot smaller than Ryan Sieg's. You're going to get him a little bit cheaper though. But when we weigh him against guys that are more in his price range, you got to be pretty happy with Brendan Poole because, again, we're just targeting finishing position and place differential. And really, most of the drivers back in the low sixes and in the fives, you can kind of categorize them and group them together in terms of, well, where can they finish? We can't always do that in terms of place differential. So clearly an edge. Kyle Sieg has been very solid. Other than Watkins Glen, where he got a -1, these other races, really good. On average last year, 10 place differential points. Not the best 2023, but again, he's a young driver, still building up. Probably feel safer going to Brendan Poole, but at the end of the day, you know what you're going to do. You know how you're going to make the decision. It's going to be who's starting close to the back. Now, knowing that, you can also get a little bit of leverage by saying, all right, well, if everyone's playing C because he's starting 3 spots further back, then you could clearly pivot to Brendan Poole. Austin Green has been really good for Jordan Anderson in this series. First time out, doesn't qualify all that well, and that doesn't really surprise me. The guy doesn't get very many races. Just go out there, run a decent lap. It's just a hot lap. The race is a completely different thing. I wouldn't be surprised to see him take the same approach that he did last season. Go out, he's not going to run the fastest lap. Just take care of the car, get the spots during the race. Tons of road course experience outside of NASCAR. You got to like him. Blaine Perkins. I always mention his Utah ARCA series, ARCA West. No, it's K&N West. K&N West win. But he has road course experience, and he hasn't demonstrated that. You look at what he has done over the last couple seasons. Now he's in a Jordan Anderson car. I would argue the equipment's pretty solid. Maybe better than what he's had in the past with Sieg. And he has been a place differential guy that we should consider. Christian Eckes, small sample size, but Kaulig had really good cars last season. If you look at Chandler Smith's advanced stats, and Chandler Smith is not really a guy that I think any of us would say, oh, world-class road series racer. But he had an excellent year in 2024 running for Kaulig. Now, I'm sure running along with A.J. Allmendinger, picking his brain, having those notes has helped. But I think that's just Kaulig in general. I mean, even Josh Williams, as we'll probably see pop up here in some of the data, had a pretty solid run at the road courses last season. So Eckes, I think, is a guy that I'm interested in that mid-tier range. Maybe goes under-owned. He could even possibly be a lap leader when we look at this field. It's not full of a lot of heavy hitters. It's not full of a lot of road ringers. Now, it's quite possible that Daniel Suarez is going to be given a rocket ship, and that could change everything. But really outside of that, and then even Christopher Bell. I know Christopher Bell is running for Hunt, but let's all admit that's more than likely a JGR pit crew, a JGR car. So Bell's also going to be on top of the board, but really it's not a stacked road course field like we have seen in other, like typically like a Watkins Glen, where you get a lot of upper series drivers dropping down. Ryan Ellis, a very solid year. So these are just the simple traditional stats to look at. Give you an idea of, all right, who's hitting place differential. Let's look a little bit further at this and see what else we can learn. Let's simply just look at, this is not just the last couple years, this is forever years. So we looked at 22 through 25. If we zoom out and say, all right, forever, every day going back to 2014, it's still pretty much the same names. So nothing really changes there. We can also see in the spreadsheet what is their best place differential day. I'll put it up, give you an idea of what we can see from a road course driver. You got Brandon Jones, once upon a time, scored 35 place differential points. We could also look at, well, what's their 4 best? And we average that out, and you can see that just to see, I think a better data point when we're looking at all the road course races is how many times did this guy score over 20 place differential points? Really hit that home run. And Brandon Jones has done it 5 times. Now, is that because Brandon Jones is a superstar on road course races? No, it's probably the opposite, that he's just so terrible at qualifying at times. He's starting DFL, dead F and last. And so to go from 38th to 18th in a JGR car, RCR car, junior motorsports car, it's really not that bad of a deal or big of a deal. Just don't wreck, and you're going to be faster than the Tommy Joe Martins, the JD Motorsports, the Mario Gosselin rides. And you can see how many times he's done it. Now, again, this is not quite the best representation because we got 47 races for Brandon Jones. Whereas you look at a guy like Ryan Ellis, who once upon a time got over 20 place differential, he's been in half the amount of races. So to get a better idea, we can just run the percentages. Say, all right, well, based on how many races you've run, what's the percentage of you going for over 20 place differential points? And we see that Brandon Jones is at the top of the board. 11% of his races, he has scored over 20 place differential points. It's kind of wild that, I don't know. I mean, there's just so many things to talk about with that. But as you know, we've all been here before. If you've been playing DFS, NASCAR, and the Xfinity Series, even outside of the road courses, you know what Brandon Jones is. He's not going away. He's going to be haunting us forever. You know, the day he retires, we will be a happy day and a sad day. You know, it'll be nice to not have to worry about him anymore, but we'll kind of miss what he has put us through. And here it is again. Without a doubt, Brandon Jones is likely going to qualify poorly in this Mexico race. And we have seen him, obviously, here, 11% of the time, score a huge place differential. But also we have seen him just absolutely lay an egg and wreck. And at a new road course in Mexico, with a bunch of drivers who are going to be new to Mexico, I would say there's going to be a lot of volatility. In any race where there's more wrecking, doesn't tend to help Brandon Jones. On one hand, it does, because if he's starting in the back just through attrition, he doesn't even have to be fast. He's going to move forward because people are going to mess up. But the people that are going to mess up is likely going to be him. He's going to be one of them. And even if he is smooth enough to run a clean day, there's going to be other people around him that aren't very smooth. And that usually just pulls like a magnet Brandon Jones in. So all that stacks up against him, it makes him, as always, the ultimate GPP play. Even when he seems like a chalk play. Even when Brandon Jones is, oh, well, you got to play Brandon Jones, he's starting in the back. And then your second sentence is, you never have to play Brandon Jones. He always loves to put that gun right up to your temple and say, go ahead. Don't pick me. See what happens. And then you fade him, and he freaking gets a top 10. And then you play him, and he pulls the trigger. It's, you know the situation. You feel much more comfortable and confident playing Ryan Sieg, who 8% of the time has gotten 20 place differential points. Even Brendan Poole, we've got a smaller sample size, 5%. And you can see they have gotten quite a few over 10 place differential, over 15 place differential. Like Ellis, you know, Balicki's stats are kind of tricky, though. You got to be careful with this because Balicki has been in some good rides. He's been in some bad rides. That's why you like Brendan Poole, who's pretty much been in kind of the same car his entire, well, not his entire career, but of late. Sieg, his equipment's gotten a little bit better of late. But you have to be careful. Clements always has been kind of the same thing. Kyle Sieg's pretty much always had the same stuff. Josh Williams, it's pretty solid. 31 races plus 9. All right, let's go to the advanced stats. So there's the just simple traditional place differential stats to look at. So let's look at some of these advanced data points. And now I got to remember, where did I even put that tab at? Here it is. I was supposed to move that all the way to the front. So we'll continue to talk about some of those value plays that we're looking at. We'll use average positions finished above expectation. So What is this data point? Positions finished above expectation. Well, what this does is it simply looks at all the road course races, looks at all the data points, and says, all right, on average, if a driver starts in, let's say, 23rd, where do they usually finish? Look at all the road course races in the Xfinity Series going back almost the last decade. Where does the 23rd place driver typically finish? Okay, now where did you finish? And so if we do that and we look at William Sawalich, I'm not really sure where Sawalich finished or started or finished in the COTA race, but if we look at that and then we look at, let's say, Austin Hill, so we're ranking these drivers based on it. So I'm just going to throw out a number because I can't remember. Let's say Sawalich started 25th. He finished 10th. Usually they finish 15th. So that's +5. He finished 5 positions better than where the driver average is. And let's say that Austin Hill ended up +6. So that's simply all we're doing here is based on your starting position, where did you finish? How does that compare to what the typical driver has averaged? And then we get a raw number. And then what we're doing is taking that raw number and just ranking. Who was the best in terms of finishing better than where they should have based on starting position? This is a pretty good stat for helping us try to predict the value plays, right? We're chasing place differential. We're wanting to maximize finishing position. So what we're looking at is last year's road course races and the first one from this year, and just simply seeing what driver was the best at finishing better than where they were expected to finish, and then just ranking them. Obviously, we got a small sample size here. We come down to Austin Green, and in 5 of his races, he put together really strong numbers. Now, his last 2 races, not so strong, but from COTA to Watkins Glen, where he started and then compared to where he finished was much better than what drivers typically do. So we ended up with some pretty positive numbers there and ranks high on our board. Shane Van Gisbergen, which this is kind of surprising because we know SVG always started well, but not only did he start towards the front, he finished up front and he finished near the top every time. Very solid numbers. Really hard to end up with a strong position finished above expectation when you're starting in, let's say, 5th place, right? Because you're not going to end up with a huge positive number. Very easy to end up with a positions finished above average or expectations when you are starting towards the back and can obviously build up a lot of positive points. Kligerman, solid racer, but not on the board. Austin Hill's been pretty good. Maybe kind of sneaky there to play Austin Hill. Has a Watkins Glen win in the Truck Series. RCR has good equipment. Other than that, Watkins Glen in the Xfinity Series typically is finishing much better than what the average driver does based on where he starts. But what we really want is to try to find some value because we're chasing some place differential. So we'll keep going. Not surprised to see Allgaier here. Gotta not say here. That's one of my big complaints. Here. We're looking at this guy here. Too many people say that in the DFS podcast space. But Allgaier, never the greatest qualifier. Not surprised to see him end up with a solid PFA E. Again, we're looking for value. This is where we find Parker Retzlaff running with Johnny Davey this year. That's fine. His JD Motorsports car has been surprisingly fast. Last year's with Jordan Anderson. And Blaine Perkins is going to be in that ride this year, which really makes me a little bit more bullish on Blaine Perkins. But I'm also intrigued by Parker Retzlaff when we look at these numbers that he finished much better than where he started, which is kind of the opposite of what we see from him at the ovals in the past, where he can really lay down a hell of a hot lap and qualify top 5 or even the pole. Looks like the road course a little bit of the opposite, but once he gets to racing, the kid with the specs figures it out. Sam Mayer, that's not going to give us much value. Let's keep going down to look at drivers in the actual race. Not surprised to see Sieg on here. Is that an appropriate use of here? to see Sieg, as we mentioned before, one of the better place differential drivers. And here he is outperforming where he should finish based on his starting position. Brennan Poole popping up, one of the first value drivers, really cheap other than Sieg. Not surprised. There's Blaine Perkins from last season with some really solid finishes, despite not the greatest starts. Arguably in better equipment this year. Kyle Sieg, I would also argue that as he gets more laps and reps with the team, his equipment's going to improve with old Sieg Sports. It's not the name of the team. LeBay gets a little bit more out of the ride based on his Canadian Pinty series, or Pinty series. I've been doing this podcast for over a decade, and I still can never remember, is it Pinty or Pinty? Is it Lilo and Stitch or Lilo and Stitch? And this is where you always say, well, I've heard it said both ways. And a lot of times that's true. Just like Catherine Leggy, or is it Catherine Legg? I've heard everybody say it every way. And even if she came on and said it, my name is pronounced Legg. And even if she said it, I would never be able to remember. You have a thing where, unless I create a mnemonic device, I am never going to remember it. And all I remember is that I don't remember. I got to get like a memento tattoo telling me how to say some of these names. At least I did remember that it's Noah Gregson instead of Gregson. I don't know how I got that one to stick. But this is a statistic that you would use if you're trying to really nail down that place differential. All right, let's look more towards what about some of our top tier drivers that we want to target. So this will use PGAE, positions gained above expectation will normalize for 100 laps. How does this one work? So when we looked at PFAE, it's based on starting position. Where did you finish? Where did you start? Where does a typical driver finish that started in your spot? Were you better than them? By how many spots? We do that. Now, with positions gained, this looks at every single lap. And so let's say it's lap 10, and you're in 5th place. And then it looks at the average for all the drivers that have ever run that race, and that were in 5th position in 10th place. And then it asks, all right, on average, of all the races at this course, the driver in 5th place on lap 10, where were they? On lap 6. And then it asks, okay, where were you on lap 6? Let's say that on average, the guy in 5th on lap 10, that's not lap 6, lap 11, I'm sorry. Got all these numbers, trying not to be confusing. So again, it's lap 10. You're in 5th place. On average, in this race, on lap 10, what does the 5th place driver do on lap 11? What place are they in? Do they go forward? Do they move back? And we look at every lap and we ask that question. And so let's say it's lap 10, and on average, on lap 11, most drivers are still in 5th place. Well, you gained a spot. And so you pick up a point. And we do that for every single lap. And we see, based on your running position, do you do better than what the average driver does? Do you go forward? Do you go back? And you calculate out stats. And it's a real good way of finding who can simply make passes. And it's a really good way of looking at those top-end high-tier drivers that need to be able to pass, that need to be able to work through the top 10, see who can gain spots. Because if you can gain spots, you can get up front, you can lead laps, you're going to maximize finishing position, getting 40, 42, 45 finishing position points. You're obviously going to be able to pick up a handful of place differential, or at least as many place differential as you can, because you have the ability to move forward as you have demonstrated. I like this stat in picking out who can be a high-end driver. And we're seeing Sawalich in just his one race at COTA this year, on average, wherever he was running, he ran better the next lap than what a typical driver does, meaning that he was able to work through traffic. Christian Eckes was able to work through traffic. Austin Green has shown that he can make moves. Obviously, SDG can work his way through. Not in the race, though. Austin Hill, a guy we just talked about. If he's picking up if he's finishing better than where he starts, then obviously he's moving forward and passing people. And we're seeing that confirmed here with his positions gained above expectation. You see big heavy hitters like Kyle Larson, Ross Chastain, really shouldn't surprise us. Allgaier, look, he's not the greatest road course racer, but he's done enough, he's experienced enough, he knows kind of what he's doing enough that, yeah, and he's got great equipment. Looking for some value, Dean Thomas is on the hunt. He's going to be a possibility. Dean Thompson, I say Thomas, but Dean Thomas is very much like a Brandon Jones. I don't know if I want to say that, but if you played the Truck Series, you knew that, man, there were days in that Tricon truck that he was a top 10 driver. I mean, he was always a top 10 driver, but he just never delivered. He would always wreck. So Thompson's going to be on the board, but don't know if I want to go with Dino. I feel fine with Parker. Obviously, we would like him a lot more than Jordan Anderson, right? Sam Mayer is able to gain positions. He's not on top of our board, but he is up there enough. He's hurt by a couple poor races, but when he's on, he is on. He won the Roval race last year. Pretty good road course driver. When we're looking at guys that are going to be running in the top 5, making those moves at the end, Sam Mayer is one of those drivers. Smaller sample size with Taylor Gray and with Byron. Jesse Love, not too bad. Don't know if I really want to go to that direction. There's Ryan Sieg. That's intriguing. Brendan Poole popping up. Blaine Perkins, Kyle Sieg. So we're seeing a repetition of drivers that we really like. We like people with the last name Sieg. We like Brendan Poole, Blaine Perkins, Parker Retzlaff, LeBay. Really want to see what LeBay looks like in practice. Maybe not even really looking at the speed chart. Hopefully we get to see like just more laps running and see how smooth he can be. But again, at the end of the day, when you're making a decision on all this value, guys, it's going to be who's starting further in the back. Now, one takeaway is I haven't talked about several top-end drivers. Let's look. So look, here's Sheldon Creed. Has some really good races, but also some very poor performances where he hasn't been able to pass. And that may downgrade him for you and me a little bit when you're trying to decide who's going to be your hog or dominator. Obviously, at Sonoma, Watkins Glen, he showed that, yeah, he can get up front and he can lead laps, run fast laps. And more often than not, he wasn't doing that. And Allgaier was higher on the chart. So if you had to decide, based on this statistic, which driver has a better chance of getting up front, passing inside the top 5, it's Allgaier. Here's Daniel Suarez, small sample size, and I don't believe he had the greatest equipment at Chicago. I would be really shocked if Junior Motorsports hasn't given him the most illegal ride ever. And I would be shocked if NASCAR were to actually call him on it. If I'm NASCAR, it's Mexico. This might as well be Richard Petty's 200th win, where he's got a jet engine at Daytona. Mexico, NASCAR, I would imagine that the inspectors are going to turn a blind eye. Look the other way. And if I'm Junior Motorsports, I don't even care if I get caught cheating and they take the win away in the end. Let's go out there and have a little bit of fun. We're already blowing tons of money, probably bringing these haulers down to Mexico. We already blew a ton of money on tequila and tacos. Just go for it. Throw some mothballs in the gas tank. We'll see. On Friday, we'll find out real quickly who's got a ridiculously fast car. Let me see if there's any other expensive drivers that... Now, you're going to hear Carson Quaple talked up a lot. And here's the thing that I want to drop on you. If you look at his position gain, not very impressive. Position finish, not very impressive. He did have a ton of speed. And he had a really good regular race. So this is going to be a driver, and I mentioned this going into the Circuit of the Americas race, why I like Carson Quaple. Maybe you remember why I liked Carson Quaple, but you're going to hear him talked about and say, oh, well, this is kind of the underdog, overlooked junior motorsports ride. Quaple was great at COTA. Not a traditional road course racer, but we saw what he could do in this car. And so he might build up a lot of steam. And that's fine. I like Quaple. I love a lot of these late model kids that have come up. You know that. I'm less bullish on Quaple this week for this reason. One of the reasons I believe why Quaple, a non-traditional road course driver, performed really well at COTA is because he had actually driven there before. He was in a Trans Am race, I believe it was. It might not have been Trans Am, it might have been some other sports car series. But he had logged laps in the past at Circuit of the Americas. It wasn't completely new to him. He'd been there before. Now he was in a great ride. He has not been to Mexico. Now, no one's been to Mexico, but simply knowing the lay of the land and where the braking zones are helped a lot. And I would argue that Quaple's finish at COTA is slightly inflated. If you're expecting him to be a top 5 driver again, I don't really see that. He's able to pull it off in COTA because he'd been there before. Would not be surprised to see him be towards the back of the top 10 or even further back. It's not going to have a terrible day, but that is something that shouldn't go overlooked. Let's jump over to CPOMs, or our continuous percentage of max speed. What does this tell us? So it takes the fastest lap of the race. All right, we go to COTA. All right, what was the fastest lap in the entire race? Then it goes through a driver, every one of their laps, and compares every one of their laps to the fastest lap. At what percentage of max speed were you running? How far off from the fastest lap of the entire race were you? And it does that for every driver. And so that's what we can see. It's just a general idea of comparing speed and finding out who is fast at a specific track. And if we do it and we look, well, no surprise that last year we only have 2 races. We got Watkins Glen, we got COTA 25. And if we look at the fastest lap of the race, and then we compare all of Conor Zilich's, Conzilla, if we look at all of Conzilla's laps, and then we look at everybody else's laps, and we factored out how close were you on all of your laps to the fastest lap, Zilich was the best. He was second best this year at COTA. And that was despite having to jump through a million hoops, deal with all kinds of situations. He still was incredibly fast in traffic. No surprise. Kyle Larson up there. Ty Gibbs up there. Taylor Gray was fast at COTA. So if we're looking at the board and we look at the fastest lap at COTA, which was likely a Conor Zilich lap, then it compares all of whatever it was, 80-some laps, 60 laps, I can't remember how many they run, of Taylor Gray's laps, and we look at each lap and figure out how far off from the fastest lap were you. All right, and then we get a number, and we get a number for everybody else, and then we rank it, and for all intents and purposes, Taylor Gray was the 4th fastest in that race. Not really a surprise for JGR Rod. As I mentioned before with Chandler Smith and Colleague, I know he's not in this race, but Chandler is not really a guy that we had ever associated with road racing, and yet if you look at what he did in the Colleague ride, again, probably not a surprise knowing how fast Colleague has been at road courses, look at the speed that he had in his ride. So your Colleague cars are going to have a lot of speed. Who are our Colleague cars? Christian Eckes. And we look. This year, 9th in his first race. Pretty good. Pretty exciting. Who else do we have with Colleague? Daniel Dye. Not super excited, but Daniel Dye has been pretty good this year. And if he's going to have a fast ride and he's only 7,100, you got to put him on the board. Especially if a lot of people are going to play in the guys in the 6s and 5Ks that might end up to the 7Ks being overlooked. You know, you're going to chase your Brendan Pools, your guys named Sieg, Parker Retzlaffs, And I could see a build where there's a lot of 6K, 5K, and then people going all the way to the top and then just ignoring the 7K guy in Daniel Dye. And it might even be the situation where, well, I don't think he can maximize place differential. And you're probably going to say that because you don't see him finishing much higher than 10th. But if he could finish 5th, which they have a lot of speed, the field is pretty much equal, no one has any experience, why can't Daniel Dye finish 5th if Kaulig again turns out one of those super fast race cars? Why can't Daniel Dye elevate to the levels that we saw Chandler Smith perform at last year? And if Dye can get to 5th, then the place differential thermometer goes up pretty high. And the finishing position bucket is pretty high. And there's even the possibility of fast laps and laps led at 7,100 and low ownership because, again, you can expect a popular build to be top-tier 10K drivers, 9K drivers, and then 3 of those 6 to 5K drivers. And then Dye gets completely ignored. Sawalich gets completely ignored. You'd even argue that Christian Eckes is going to get ignored. Whereas in this race, how does DraftKings, obviously they're going to use betting odds to come up with this, but even with the betting markets, how do you really put good odds on a race that we've never been at before? Well, they're just simply, what have they done at road courses in the past? All right, well, you don't have large sample sizes with a lot of these Xfinity drivers. They change around teams a lot. So how do you even set those odds? And then from those odds, you set pricing. And I don't think that the pricing really tells us the real picture. Sure, you just slap a 9,700 on Justin Allgaier. Sure, Connor Zillage is going to get the biggest number, and we're going to want to jam him in. Same with Ty Gibbs. I guess Mayer has definitely deserved this 9,500. Austin Hill's probably deserved that. I just don't know how accurate the pricing is. And I think those guys are all fair. And that's fine. I don't disagree with that. They all have the likelihood of winning. They've got enough experience and track records. But when we get into the 8K range, how do you price Taylor Graham? 8,400? You could easily give him a $9,500 price tag and no one's really going to cry foul. Same Mayer could be higher. He could be 10.5. The reason he's not 10.5 is because there's other drivers in this race, but they didn't stop him at the Roval. It's not stopped him in the past. Austin Hill could easily be higher. Eckes could be 9,000, and I don't think anyone would argue with that based on Kaulig, based on his experience last year. I know he didn't run a lot of road course races in the Truck Series, but he was fast at Dakota. Maybe say, you can't go 9,000. 8,500 is definitely a solid option. And you'd argue that Sheldon Creed's overpriced, but not really, because Sheldon Creed is, Ricky Stenhouse 2.0 in the Xfinity Series. He has speed, he has talent, but in every series he's been in, we know he's completely boom or bust. And you can look. When we look at, I'm looking at Warp right here, which is fine. We'll talk about that in a second. But he's fast enough. Jesse Lowe could probably be higher. All right, so that was my Kaulig thing. Well, let's go down and see what Josh Williams was in terms of speed. I don't know if his speed's going to be great. It's really not bad. It's top 20 speed. And so you're probably not going to get much by looking at percentage max speed for your value drivers. What we really want to see more is racecraft from these drivers, making their way forward, maintaining position, not losing spots. So for value, I'm not too concerned with percentage of max speed. I like that more for these high-end drivers where it's going to make up the difference for that third bucket, fast laps and laps led. And then last, to wrap up our podcast, again, racefortheprize.com. Even if you're not buying the spreadsheet, you can always donate because you like the podcast. PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. $10, get you the Mexico sheets. Was it 27 at the beginning of the month? We'll say $20. If you throw in $20, you're going to have Mexico, Pocono, Atlanto, and Raca Calize. It's Lime Rock in Spanish. Get all those sheets. He's worded, man. All right, back to our last one, weighted average running position. What is this statistic going to tell us? All right, so we all know what average running position is. It looks at all of your laps from a race. and says, all right, what was your average running position? Cool, awesome. You ran a bunch of laps in first, but you're also in 10th for some of it. We calculated, your average running position was 4th. Where does that rank amongst the field? Now, weighted average running position is a better statistic, and it's really good at the road courses. Why? Well, what weighted average running position does is, all right, we'll run an average of all of your laps. Let's take your position in every lap, and let's find out what your average position was. Here's the catch. Those laps at the beginning of the race, they're not very indicative of where you're going to finish. They're not very important, so we are not going to boost those. But the laps towards the end of the race, which tend to correlate or be more indicative of where you finish, we're going to give those a little bit of a boost, a little nudge, a little edge when we do our calculations of average running position. And that'll give us a score, and then we have a score, and then we can rate each of the drivers based on that score, and you get a weighted average running position. So why is it so special at a road course? Because the road courses, we have stages. And we've seen time and time again where a driver, stage 1, may just be out there biding his time, not pushing the limits, not trying to get into trouble. And in a traditional average running position stat, if you're running in the back for stage 3 and stage 2, well, it's going to kill your average running position in the end. And it's going to look like, he wasn't very good. Yeah, because in stage 3 or stage 1, he just was out there. In stage 2, he's just biding his time. He turns it on in stage 3 and has a top 5 car. But his average running position is going to say, that looks like a top 20 car because it's weighing every lap the same. Every lap is not the same. Weighted average running position says every lap's not the same. The laps at the end matter more. They should be weighted more. And with this stat, we get a better representation of who really is a good driver. And boy, no surprise, when we look at weighted average running position over the last season at the road courses, Conzilla number 1, SVG, Young Money, Ty Gibbs, Taylor Gray, small sample size, but he's fast. And in that one race, his weighted average running position was the 4th best in the field. Austin Hill, 3rd best average running position at COTA this year, 6th best at COTA last year. A lot of top 5s where, if we look at the field, it's one of the top 5 drivers in terms of weighted average running position. Creed's up there. Really high-end performances and then some stinkers. But if you look at it a little close, the 2 stinkers were at COTA. Outside of COTA, I'm pretty solid. This will help us not only just find drivers that are good at the top end, it also help you out with your value as well. Let's see who's ranking good on value. Harrison Burton could go overlooked. I don't know if I really need to go to Harrison Burton, but we'll see what he looks like in practice. So we get down to the cheaper drivers. Daniel Dye, Parker Retzlaff, LeVay's pretty good, Sieg's pretty good. You know the guy that we're not mentioning when we're talking about palms? You know the guy that we're not mentioning when we're talking about weighted above running position? Or even PFAE, positions finished above expectation? Or positions gained above expectation? It's Brandon Jones. His stats suck. He is not a good road course driver. 47 races in the Xfinity series. Trucks, no, I'm not doing trucks. Xfinity mainly. I'm sure he's got some truck road races. Know he's got ARCA. Know he's done Trans Ams. Guy's done tons of road racing. And he's terrible. But every once in a while, he just doesn't wreck. And his ride pretty much drags him across the finish line. And in doing so, he ends up with a great day. But statistically, every one of these stats, they do not look good. His traditional stats don't look good. His advanced stats don't look good. But when you run enough races and you qualify poorly in every single one of them, you're going to have more than a handful of great DFS days. But when you can't qualify and you can't race, you're going to have a boatload of bad races. So you get a boatload of bad races, and you're going to get a handful of every once in a while, Brandon Jones finds the pot of gold. That's going to do it here on the Fantasy NASCAR podcast. Thank you for joining me. Like, subscribe, share. RaceForThePrize.com is where you get access to Fantasy NASCAR Spreadsheet. Adios.